Parliament has 2 years to amend sections of the Tax Administration Act and the Promotion of Access to Information Act. Now, this follows the Constitutional Court's ruling that the law should allow for tax records to be accessed in limited circumstances and in the public interest. The Apex Court reaffirmed the 2021 North Gauteng High Court ruling on the invalidity of certain sections of the Act. Now, it follows a legal challenge by Arena Holdings against SARS for rejecting an application to access the tax records of former President Jacob Zuma by the Financial Mail and Amapungane under the Promotion of Access to Information Act. Now, the challenge centers on corruption allegations contained in Jacques Pauw's book, The President's Keepers. Now, Professor Keith Engel is South African Institute of Taxation CEO and joins us live now. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's start with the implications of these judgments. Just how far-reaching are they?
Well, we're actually not sure. We're dealing with one fact pattern, but at what point do you open it up? Is it because he's the president, no matter what? Or is it there must be some proof or concern about corruption? We're not sure which way this goes. So they've asked to amend the law in light of the judgment, but the judgment is fairly vague on its reasoning. So what is the public interest? So we will see that, and ultimately the Parliament will decide. My feeling is the right answer is that if you're a public figure, there should be a certain right to access of information regardless. That way it's neutral. You can't say, well, just somebody because accuses you is the reason for opening. So it's going to be quite unclear. And then the other issue will be what information has to be disclosed. So things are, yes, the door is open. How far and for what reason is quite unclear at this stage. But it is a landmark.
And especially, critically, as you just mentioned there, the information that can then be in the public domain. But also, as you alluded to a little earlier on, let's talk about this. The striking of the balance here as Parliament looks into this now in SARS between public interest and a right to privacy.
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things is being a public figure. You'll take a look, like the United States doesn't have a rule like that, but the president voluntarily can show their tax records. So you might want to go with something like that. The question is how much records and how deep and for what purpose. So no matter what you do, you have to strike a balance. And the question is, what's the trigger and what's the extent of information to be disclosed? Is the tax return really what we're looking at? So one of the questions I have is, look, we have concerns about corruption. So what makes you think that the president is going to disclose his tax information to SARS? They're certainly not. He's probably going to report the income he wanted to report. So how meaningful is that? Then do we have to ask ourselves, do we get all the correspondence between him and SARS? So, I'm not sure. This is a nice little opening. It feels good. But how meaningful this is, I'm really not sure. But yes, it's important that our public figures, there is some light shine on what they're doing. Because if we don't believe in the leaders, then why should we follow the law? And I think that was definitely an element in the decision.
And especially because it comes at a time when, even the SARS commissioner has said that, some of the public figures need to start doing this in order to, particularly improve accountability in that regard. But I think one other thing that, of course, is going to be important to look into here as Parliament looks at this now is that what would constitute these limited circumstances as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, that's the question. Is it going to be just because you're a public figure? In which case, is it just the president, Parliament, anybody who makes the law? So that's the question of that scope. Second question is, well, does it need a trigger at all? Or, yes, there must be some fire in order to have that disclosure. Now, they link disclosure to freedom. Mm. So that meant a little bit you'll hear, well, is the disclosure important for your ability to vote? In which case, just looking at the taxpayers' returns, leaders' returns, does that really influence you? Or is there, the importance is it will influence your voting decision? Not sure. I don't really think so. I think you're probably going to have, the SARS people will probably want an objective circumstance rather than just some sort of investigative trigger. But it's really, you're not sure which way to go on it other than, yes, they need to open the door.
Now, going back then to SARS in this matter, because Parliament has 24 months in order to look at this one. Now, SARS also ordered to make a new decision on access to the former president's tax records. So now it's sitting back on their tables. How do they begin to tackle it?
Yeah, well, I think at this point, one, you know that SARS is going to be involved with Parliament on the lawmaking. So remember, Treasury and SARS, this will probably be a money bill. It's also another minister's bill in terms of the Promotion Access to Justice Act. So they're going to be involved both at a political level and actually a level of release. So my feeling is they will probably want to do both in conjunction with one another. And my assumption will be they will provide a release of information, but it will probably be limited to the returns themselves and nothing anymore. So that's probably what they'll need to do.
So, Prof, pardon me, listening to what you're saying then, it doesn't sound like while this process unfolds, the information will be made public immediately?
No, they probably won't. Because remember, they have 2 years to change the law. So they have 2 years to release the information, in my mind. Maybe I'm wrong. So and clearly, they're not going to want to release some information that's outside of the new law. So the policy and the act are really going together. So if I am the Revenue Service, I wouldn't want to issue one without the other. And so my feeling is it'll take 1 to 2 years to get this done, and then there'll be some release of information. The real other question I get is what's the value? So if you see his returns, is that really going to change the issue? What you really want to know is what he didn't disclose. But yes, I think some sunshine brought to things does provide some help.
It's going to be interesting to see what information is disclosed, how this one unfolds, how they begin then to look at amending some of these sections as called on by the court. But Prof, thank you so much for those insights. At least now we have a bit of an understanding as to, really what could potentially unfold in the next 24 months. That's Professor Keith Engel. He is with the South African Institute of Taxation and he's the CEO there.